Hi, I'm Miss Becky from the Montgomery County Norristown Public Library, and today we're going to make a pillowcase. If you didn't get a packet from the library with the materials that you need, this is what you will need. You will need a piece of fabric that measures 41 by 26. So you'll need a piece of fabric. A normal bolt of fabric is about 42 to 44 inches wide. So you will actually need the width of a piece of fabric and the length of 26 inches. So that would be almost a yard of fabric for the main part of the pillowcase. And then for the, excuse me, going off the screen, sorry. For the edging, the little edge of the pillowcase, you will need a piece that is 11 by 41 and folded in half and pressed. So it would be the width of a bolt, a fabric bolt, and 11 inches long. So it'd be kind of a quarter of a yard maybe of this edging fabric. Aside from the fabric, you'll need a sewing machine threaded with the color thread that will match your project, and a pair of scissors. This is a very easy project, a good beginner project. So let's get started. You'll also need some pins. So the first thing you want to do is lay your fabric, your large piece of fabric, right side up, laid out on the table. And this looks the same on both sides, so it doesn't really matter which side I put up. This is the smaller piece, and like I said, you fold it in half with the wrong sides together and it pressed in half. So you can obviously see on this one, this is the right side, this is the wrong side. It's paler, the colors are not as vibrant, the print is not as vibrant. So right side up on this one. This one, it doesn't matter because it's the same on either side, and you're going to put the long sides, match them up together onto the big fabric. And we're going to grab our pins, and we're going to pin the two pieces together. So you want to put them perpendicular to the edge of the fabric, because as you're sewing, you're going to be pulling the pins out, and it's a lot easier to pull them out when they're going this way rather than parallel to the edge. So just go about every 4 or 5 inches. We just want to make sure the edges stay matched up as we're sewing. So we're just going to keep, see my shoulder. We're just going to keep pinning that all the way across the long edge. So we're going to keep doing this. Try not to stick yourself. In my household, they joke that it's not a Becky creation unless there's a blood spot on it somewhere, which is kind of sad. But that is what happens sometimes when you're not paying good attention to what you're doing. So, go just to the edge now. It's a little bent, but that's okay. All right, so we pinned all the way across, and now we're ready to sew our first seam. Okay, so we're going to start by putting the edge of our fabric right at the edge of the needle, and then we're going to line it up with the edge of the presser foot, so that the presser foot is going to be our guide for our seam. So as we sew, we're going to keep the edge of the presser foot even with the edge of the fabric. I like to hold my threads, make sure both your threads are out there. You have 2 threads, one from the bottom, one from the top. I like to hold them for the first few stitches so they don't get all gunked up in my seam. And now we're ready to sew. Always stop for the pins and remove them. And See how the pins keep our fabric even and in line. And you see how I'm keeping the edge of the fabric in line with the presser foot. And just keep sewing as we go. This is a long seam. Just make sure your fabric is nice and flat as you're sewing, and flat underneath. Just bypass that pin. Almost there. To the end, then I'm going to do a couple of backup stitches just to reinforce the stitching. Okay, so now pull it out. I have a little trimmer here. You can cut it off with the scissors if you don't have one. And there we go. This is all stitched evenly all the way across. So now I'm going to take it, I'm going to press the seam up toward the edge of the pillowcase. And you see this part here is a little bit longer than this part. So you can just take a scissors and trim that off. Just make sure it's square. Now you see I've pressed down the fabric, so the seam, so that it faces the edge of the pillowcase. And now we're going to do a little top stitching, and I'm going to do about 1/8 of an inch or a little bit more, slightly more. I'm going to use this little divot on the edge of my presser foot as a guide. Or you can use the edge of that hole where the needle goes through, whatever works best for you. If you would rather mark it with a dressmaker's pencil or a piece of chalk. We just want to keep the stitching close to the edge here so that it helps to hold the seam down and just makes it a little bit stronger. And it kind of puts a nice little decorative line there. I'm just gonna make my stitches a little bit longer because they look a little bit nicer when they're long. Okay, so got that all lined up, and then I'm just gonna sew. And I'm just using that edge of my presser foot to guide me through here. I just want to try to keep it even because you will see this. You will see the seam. So you want to try not to go sideways or crazy. Thought I was running out of thread, but that is not the case. Just looked funny. And don't go too fast unless you're really sure of what you're doing. Because when you go fast, you start to make a mistake and then you panic, and then then you got a big mess to clean up. You should, if you're going to be serious about sewing, you should have a little tool called a seam ripper, because it always is necessary to have one when you make a mistake, because it makes things a lot easier. So you see on the back side of the seam, you can see the two seams. This is the first one we sewed that sewed the two pieces together. And this other one is the top stitching, and you see how that's holding down the seam so it's not popping up. And then on the other side, you can see how it makes a nice little line of stitching across the edging of your pillowcase. The next thing we're going to do is bring our edges together. So we're going to take the pillowcase edging, and you want the right sides together, so you want the side that has the top stitching on the inside as you're folding it together. So as you're folding and matching up the edges, this sewn part that you pressed up and stitched down is going to be facing outward. So we want to make very sure, first of all, that the folded edges are completely matched up, that they're not uneven, because that is going to be the very edge of the pillowcase, and you don't want those to be uneven right there. So put a pin right at the beginning. And then the next thing we're going to try to do is match up these seams right here so that that's nice and even. Okay, so that looks pretty good. Pull that out a little bit, flatten that out. We're going to put another pin right in there, right on the seam. And then you're going to keep going all the way along the edge, pin about every 4 or 5 inches apart, just so things stay together and don't shift as you're sewing. Put another one here. And when you get to the bottom, you may find that your edge is a little uneven. Don't worry about it. If it bothers you a lot, you can trim it. One more here. One at the corner. And if you flip it over, you can see it's a little bit off there, but it's not a big deal. It's going to be on the inside. No one's going to see it. So just make sure everything's flat. And then you can go across the short edge and pin this as well. This is a very easy pattern, but you can make some really pretty pillowcases. So if you have the right combination of fabric. Okay, we're ready to sew again. As before, we're going to use the edge of the presser foot as our guide. I like to start a little bit in and then do a back stitch to the edge and then come forward. That gives a little extra strength to the seam right at the opening where the pillow is going to be going in and out all the time. So I'm gonna do a stitch or two just to secure the threads. I'm holding on to my threads here. And then I'm going to push the back button and go backwards all the way to the edge and then come forward. And that reinforces the edge of the seam so that it's stronger for the extra abuse it's going to get when putting pillows and pulling them out. We're going to keep sewing here. When you get here, you want to make sure that no edges are sticking up from your your seam there, and then just keep going on through. And I think my camera is not liking the vibration from the sewing machine. So we'll see how we can do here. All right, I think that's okay. Just lightly, that pin, lightly guide. You don't have to push, you don't have to pull. The machine does all the work. You just make it go in the right direction, just like steering a car. You don't have to push or pull on the steering wheel. You just let the car go. Well, I guess you have to push the gas pedal, but otherwise. Okay, when you get to the corner, and you want to go by the shorter piece of fabric, which is the one underneath, which I can just barely see through, to see that this piece is about 1/4 of an inch longer than the bottom piece. So you're going to go very near to the edge about, and you want to put your needle down into the fabric. You're going to lift your presser foot, and you're going to pivot the fabric. And then you're going to keep going. And that is how you sew a corner. Take the pin out. Almost done here. I'm going to keep my hands out of the way so you can see everything as it goes by. Pin. And then goes to the end. And then you're going to do back stitch again just to reinforce that. Okay, now we're done. Pull it out. Trim it off. Use scissors if you don't have this doodad. Okay, now we're finished. I have the corner here, the inside corner, and I'm just going to trim off on the diagonal here. Don't cut, get close to the stitches, but don't cut them. Okay, so what this does is it eliminates the bulk in the corner. When you turn the seam right side out, you don't have a big bunch of fabric in the corner. I'm just going to trim off this uneven edge here too, just so everything is hunky-dory. Okay, so now this is essentially finished, but I want to make it a little bit stronger on the edge. So I'm going to go ahead and sew a zigzag stitch around the edge. And if you have a zigzag stitch on your machine, you can do that too. And the zigzag is just going to add a little extra strength to the seam, just keep it together. And see how this goes here. And just sort of don't sew past your seam line. You want to keep it close to the edge. So, and you see it kind of binds the edge of the seam together. So that just makes it a little bit stronger, a little bit more durable. And, you know, if you're using a pillowcase every day, you're sleeping on it, whatever, you want it to stay strong. You don't want the sides to fall apart. So just be very careful. You just have to kind of watch the edge. That you don't go over the stitching that you just had. A straight stitch. Okay, so when you get to the corner, you just kind of pivot around. You don't have a corner to stick your needle into, so you just keep going. Just keep your zigzag between your stitch and your edge, and you'll be good to go. Okay. Well, you can trim that off. And trim all your excess threads off that are sticking out from the edge where you started sewing. So the last thing we have to do is turn it inside out. And if you have either a blunt pencil, a knitting needle, this is a giant knitting needle, or a chopstick, you can use that to poke out the corners. And we just need to bring it all right side out. La la. And let me show you how to poke up the corners here using your tool. Very, very gently poke so that your corners are nice and sharp. Don't poke too hard or too crazy, or you'll make a hole, and then that won't be very good. You'll have to sew it shut. So now we're all turned right side out, and there is your pillowcase. I would love, when you finish this, to send me a photo of you with your new pillowcase to my email at rhoover@mclink.org. It's up there on the screen. And send me a picture, because I miss you guys. Have fun.